My name is Elsa, and I am 29 years old. I thought paying above market rent to my parents was helping them financially. I never imagined they would ask me to leave with only 30 days' notice, so my pregnant sister Brittany and her fiancé could move in rent-free. The shock of discovering I had been used for years left me reeling. My own family had betrayed my trust in the most painful way. Let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button before I tell you how I went from being the perfect daughter to sending my parents a letter that changed everything. I have always been the responsible one in my family. From an early age, I learned to be independent and financially self-sufficient. By 23, I had a stable job as a marketing coordinator at a local firm, saved enough for a decent car, and was ready to find my own place to live. Unlike many of my friends who struggled with student loans, I had worked part-time throughout college and graduated debt-free. My relationship with my parents, Tom and Diana, was what I would call complicated but manageable. They were never overtly cruel or abusive, but there was always an unspoken hierarchy in our home. My younger sister Brittany, who is 4 years younger than me, always seemed to receive more attention, more praise, and more forgiveness when things went wrong. As a child, I often wondered why my achievements at school were acknowledged with a simple nod, while Brittany bringing home a C- would result in celebratory ice cream. As I grew older, I rationalized this treatment as different expressions of love. Some parents are tougher on the child they see as stronger, right? I told myself. They pushed me harder because they believed in my capabilities, while Brittany needed more encouragement. This explanation helped me cope with the favoritism I witnessed throughout my life. 3 years ago, when I was looking for an apartment, my parents approached me with what seemed like a mutually beneficial arrangement. They had inherited a 2-bedroom apartment from my grandparents located in a nice neighborhood about 15 minutes from my workplace. The apartment was part of a small building with 4 units that my grandparents had purchased as an investment decades ago. We could really use some help with the mortgage payments, my father explained during Sunday dinner. The bank still has a lien on the property, and between property taxes and maintenance costs, it is becoming a burden. My mother chimed in. We thought since you are looking for a place anyway, this could help us both. You would have a nice home, and we would have a reliable tenant. The rent they proposed was about 20% above market value for similar units in the area, but I justified it in my mind. I would be helping my family while living in a place with some sentimental value, as I had fond memories of visiting my grandparents there as a child. Besides, my father added, this way the money stays in the family instead of going to some random landlord. I agreed and moved in the following month. The apartment needed some work with outdated appliances and worn carpeting, but it had good bones, as my grandmother would have said. Over the next 3 years, I invested my own time and money into making it truly feel like home. I replaced the carpet with hardwood flooring, painted the walls in soft, calming colors, updated the lighting fixtures, and even installed a new kitchen backsplash. My parents never offered to reimburse me for these improvements, but I considered it an investment in my own comfort and quality of life. The living room became my sanctuary with a comfortable sectional sofa facing the large windows that overlooked a small park across the street. I arranged my collection of books on built-in shelves and hung artwork I had carefully selected from local artists. The second bedroom became my home office, a necessity that proved invaluable when the pandemic hit and remote work became the norm. During these 3 years, my relationship with my family continued in its familiar pattern. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were a monthly tradition where Brittany would often dominate the conversation with stories of her latest drama. My sister has always lived a more chaotic life than mine, bouncing between jobs in retail and food service, dating men who seemed incapable of commitment, and occasionally asking our parents for financial help when rent was due or her car needed repairs. Despite the obvious favoritism, I maintained a cordial relationship with Brittany. We were never close confidants sharing secrets and dreams, but we could enjoy a movie together or chat about neutral topics like new restaurants in town or the latest Netflix shows. I accepted that we were simply different people with different approaches to life. The last family gathering before everything changed occurred about a month before the incident. It was a typical Sunday dinner at my parents' house, with my mother preparing her signature pot roast and my father mixing his 2 strong cocktails. Brittany arrived late as usual, but this time she brought someone with her, a man named Jake, whom she introduced as her boyfriend of 3 months. Jake seemed pleasant enough, if a bit quiet. He worked as an IT specialist for a local company, and from the bits of conversation I caught, He appeared more stable and mature than Brittany's previous boyfriends. While we were having dessert, my sister made her announcement. "Mom, Dad, Elsa, Jake and I have some news," she said, barely containing her excitement. "We are having a baby." My parents' reactions were immediate and overwhelming. My mother burst into tears of joy while my father stood to shake Jake's hand vigorously before pulling both of them into a hug. There were immediate questions about due dates, gender reveals, and whether they had thought of names. "I am about 10 weeks along," Brittany explained. "We will know more after the next ultrasound, but everything looks good so far." I offered my sincere congratulations. Despite our differences, I was genuinely happy for my sister. She had always talked about wanting children someday, and while this relationship seemed relatively new, Jake appeared to be supportive and excited about becoming a father. What I did not realize during that celebratory dinner was how this pregnancy would soon be used as justification to upend my life completely. I had no idea that my parents and sister were already formulating plans that would prioritize her needs at the expense of mine, continuing a pattern that had existed throughout our lives, but was about to reach a new level of inequality. As I drove home that night to my comfortable apartment, I felt a twinge of envy, not for the baby or even for Brittany's relationship, but for the unbridled enthusiasm my parents showed for her life choices. I wondered briefly if they would have reacted the same way if I had been the one announcing a pregnancy, but I pushed the thought away. I was happy in my career, my home, and my independence. I did not need their validation to feel fulfilled. Little did I know that in just 4 short weeks, the home I had lovingly created would be demanded back by the very people who had encouraged me to make it my own. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I woke up at 6:30, went for a quick jog around the neighborhood, showered and was enjoying my first cup of coffee while checking emails on my laptop. The spring sunlight filtered through my kitchen window, creating patterns on the countertop I had recently refinished. It was in this peaceful moment that my phone rang, displaying my mother's name on the screen. "Good morning, Mom," I answered, expecting perhaps a question about an upcoming family event, or maybe a request for a recipe I had made for a previous gathering. "Elsa, we need to talk about the apartment." She began, her tone unusually direct. There was none of the customary small talk that typically preceded our conversations. "Is everything okay? Is there a problem with the building?" I asked immediately, concerned that perhaps there was an issue with plumbing or electrical systems that needed attention. "No, nothing like that," she replied. "Your father and I have been discussing the situation with Brittany and Jake. As you know, they are expecting and they need a suitable place to live." I made a sound of agreement, still not understanding where this conversation was heading. "Yes, I imagine they will be apartment hunting soon. The rental market has been competitive lately, but I would be happy to help them look if they need assistance." There was a pause on the other end of the line, longer than would be natural in casual conversation. When my mother spoke again, her words landed like a physical blow. "Actually, we have decided that they should move into your apartment. It's a perfect situation for them, with the 2 bedrooms, and the location is ideal for Jake's commute." For several seconds, I could not formulate a response. My brain seemed to be processing her words in slow motion, struggling to comprehend the implication. "My apartment? But I live here," I finally managed to say, my voice smaller than I intended. "We know this is unexpected." She continued as if she was simply discussing a minor schedule change rather than demanding I vacate my home. "But you are established and independent. You can easily find another place. Brittany and the baby need stability right now." The conversation grew increasingly surreal as my mother explained that I would need to move out within 30 days, which she characterized as generous notice. I tried to reason with her, reminding her that I had a rental agreement, that I had invested in improvements to the property, that finding a new place and moving was not a simple matter of packing a suitcase. "What rental agreement?" she asked. And the floor seemed to drop out from under me. "We never had a formal lease. This was a family arrangement." She was technically correct. In my trust and naivety, I had never insisted on a written lease. There were emails documenting our agreement and 3 years of bank transfers showing my rent payments, but nothing with signatures that would hold up in court. I attempted to negotiate. "Mom, I understand they need a place to live, but this is my home. I have put so much work into it. Maybe I can help them find something nearby, or perhaps we could discuss this as a family and come up with a timeline that works for everyone." My mother sighed with exasperation as if I were being deliberately difficult. "Elsa, your sister is pregnant. This isn't about you right now. We need to focus on what is best for Brittany and the baby." Before I could respond further, she told me my father wanted to speak to me and passed the phone to him. Elsa, my father's voice was stern, reminiscent of how he would address me as a teenager when I had broken a rule. I am disappointed by your reaction. This should not be such a big deal. You have always been able to land on your feet, unlike your sister who needs more support. Don't be selfish about this. I felt tears welling up but fought to keep my voice steady. Dad asking me to leave my home of 3 years with only a month's notice doesn't feel fair. Could we at least discuss a longer timeline or some compensation for the improvements I have made? Compensation, he scoffed. Those improvements were your choice. No one asked you to replace perfectly good carpet or repaint walls that were fine as they were. This is still our property and we need it for Brittany now. As the conversation continued, I learned more details that only increased my sense of betrayal. Not only was I being forced out, but Brittany and Jake would not be paying rent at all. My parents framed this as helping the young couple save for their future, apparently unconcerned about the financial strain this would place on me having to find a new apartment with higher rent and cover moving expenses. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my shock giving way to anger. For 3 years, I have been paying above market rent to help you with the mortgage. But Brittany gets to live there for free. It is different, my mother insisted. You were established in your career. They are just starting out and having a baby. By the end of the call, it was clear that my parents had made their decision and no amount of reasoning would change their minds. I was expected to accept this arrangement without complaint, to understand that once again, Brittany's needs superseded mine. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold as waves of emotion crashed over me. Betrayal from the people who should have protected me. Hurt that 3 years of reliable payments and property improvements meant nothing. Anger at the blatant favoritism, and underneath it all a deep sadness as I looked around at the home I had created, knowing I would soon have to leave it behind. I called in sick to work that day, something I rarely did. I needed time to process what had happened and to begin the daunting task of searching for a new place to live with an impossibly tight deadline. As I scrolled through rental listings on my laptop, each one more expensive than what I currently paid, the unfairness of the situation kept hitting me in fresh waves. Why had I never questioned the above-market rent I was paying? Why had I invested my own money in a property that wasn't mine? Why had I continued to accept the unequal treatment that had been a constant in my family dynamic? The answers were uncomfortable, but clear. I had been conditioned since childhood to put my parents' and sisters' needs before my own. I had been the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who didn't make waves. And now I was paying the price for that compliance in the most literal sense. The next few weeks were a blur of apartment viewings, packing boxes, and increasing tension with my family. Finding an affordable rental in our city's competitive market was challenging enough without the added time pressure. Most places within my budget were significantly smaller than my current apartment, further from my workplace, or in less desirable neighborhoods. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my mother asking about my moving timeline, whether certain furniture pieces would be left behind, and when Brittany and Jake could come by to start envisioning the space. Each message felt like salt in an open wound, but I responded with clinical detachment, providing only the necessary information. We were thinking of coming by this Saturday to take measurements, my mother texted one evening. Brittany wants to see if her furniture will fit in the bedrooms. I replied that I would be out apartment hunting all day Saturday, but would leave a key with the neighbour if they insisted on coming. I couldn't bear the thought of watching my sister plan her future in the home I was being forced to leave. They took me up on this offer, and when I returned late that afternoon, exhausted from viewing 5 underwhelming apartments, I found evidence of their visit. A measuring tape left on my bedroom floor, a coffee mug in the sink that wasn't mine, a notepad with Brittany's handwriting listing measurements of various walls and spaces. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the initial phone call, Brittany and Jake stopped by again, this time while I was home. I had just finished packing my books into boxes, the built-in shelves now bare and forlorn-looking. Brittany breezed in without seeming to notice my red-rimmed eyes or the chaos of half-packed belongings. We were in the neighborhood and thought we would drop by to look at the kitchen again, she explained with a smile that didn't acknowledge the abnormality of the situation. Jake thinks we might need to get a smaller dining table. I nodded stiffly and retreated to my bedroom, unable to maintain the pretense of normalcy. Through the closed door, I could hear them moving around the apartment, their voices carrying as they discussed their plans. "Once we get rid of all these books and that oversized couch, we will have plenty of space for the baby gear," Brittany was saying. "What about that desk in the second bedroom? Is your sister taking it?" Jake asked. "I assume so, but if not, we could probably sell it. It doesn't really match the nursery theme I want." I pressed my hands against my ears, not wanting to hear more about how quickly they planned to erase all traces of my presence. The desk they were discussing was a vintage piece I had refinished myself, spending weekends sanding and staining it to perfection. The thought of it being sold at a fraction of its worth or worse, discarded entirely, made my stomach clench. Later that week, I was at a coffee shop near one of the apartments I had viewed discussing application details with the property manager when Brittany and two of her friends entered. They sat at a table near enough that I could hear snippets of their conversation. They didn't notice me partially hidden behind a decorative plant. "So you're getting Elsa's apartment? That's amazing," one friend exclaimed. Brittany nodded, looking pleased. "Yeah, Mum and Dad decided we needed it more with the baby coming. And get this, they're letting us stay rent-free for at least the first year." "Wow, you're so lucky to have parents like that," the other friend commented. "I know, right? And lucky to have a sister who has to give up her place." Brittany laughed, though she didn't seem very happy about it. "You should have seen her face when we came to measure for furniture." "Is she having trouble finding a new place?" the first friend asked. Brittany shrugged dismissively. "I guess, but she will figure it out. She always does. Besides, it's not like she has a baby to worry about." I sat frozen coffee forgotten as their conversation confirmed what I had suspected, but hadn't wanted to believe. This wasn't about Brittany and Jake being in desperate need. This was about convenience and entitlement. My sister wasn't grateful for what she perceived as my sacrifice. She expected it as her due. When I finally found a new apartment, it was far from ideal. It was a one-bedroom unit in an older building 25 minutes further from my office, and despite being smaller and less updated than my current place, the rent was 15% higher. The landlord required first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit depleting most of my savings. The day I signed the lease, I received a text from my father asking when they could expect the keys to the apartment, not a message asking how my search was going or offering help with the move, just a demand for the keys. Moving day arrived, and unlike when I had moved into the apartment 3 years earlier and my parents had helped carry boxes and arrange furniture, I was on my own. I had hired movers, another expense I hadn't planned for, and watched as they loaded my carefully curated possessions into a truck. As I was doing a final walkthrough, making sure nothing had been forgotten, Brittany and Jake arrived with the first of their boxes. They barely acknowledged me as they began bringing items in, talking excitedly about where things would go. I noticed my mother's car pulling up outside, and rather than face another painful interaction, I handed the keys to Jake, mumbled a quick, "It's all yours," and left through the back door. Driving to my new apartment following the moving truck through unfamiliar streets, I felt a hollowness in my chest. I had lost more than just an apartment. I had lost the illusion that my family valued me as much as they valued my sister. I had lost the comfort of believing that despite the favoritism, they would at least treat me fairly in important matters. And perhaps most painfully, I had lost the home I had created for myself, the first place that had truly felt like mine. That night, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of my new smaller bedroom, surrounded by unpacked boxes, I made a decision. Something had to change in how I related to my family. I could not continue to accept being treated as an afterthought, expected to sacrifice without complaint. For the first time in my life, I needed to prioritize myself, even if that meant upsetting the family dynamic I had always worked so hard to maintain. The Thanksgiving holiday arrived 3 months after I had moved out of the apartment. Despite my conflicted feelings about seeing my family, I had accepted my mother's invitation, believing it would be easier to maintain appearances than to explain my absence to extended family members, who would surely be present. I arrived at my parents' house with a store-bought pumpkin pie and a carefully maintained neutral expression. The familiar sense of turkey and my mother's cornbread stuffing filled the air, triggering childhood memories that now felt tainted by recent events. My aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins were already there along with my grandmother on my mother's side. Brittany and Jake arrived shortly after me. Brittany's pregnancy now clearly visible as she entered wearing a form-fitting sweater that accentuated her growing belly. She received immediate attention from everyone, with my mother fussing over whether she was comfortable and my grandmother insisting she take the most cushioned chair in the living room. "Elsa, you look tired," my mother commented when she finally turned her attention to me. Is the new job keeping you busy? I had not changed jobs, only apartments, a detail my mother should have known. Before I could correct her, my father interjected. She's always working too hard, not taking enough time to enjoy life, he said, as if my dedication to my career was a character flaw rather than a necessity for maintaining financial independence. Throughout the pre-dinner mingling, I noticed how my parents steered conversations away from my recent move or any mention of the apartment. When my aunt asked me how I was settling into my new place, my mother quickly interrupted to announce that the turkey was ready, effectively cutting off my response. The seating arrangement at dinner placed me between my cousin and uncle, as far from Brittany as possible. As dishes were passed and wine was poured, conversation flowed around me. I participated minimally, offering polite responses when directly addressed, but otherwise remaining quiet. The tension I felt eased slightly as I focused on my meal, grateful for the momentary distraction of food. However, that relief was short-lived. "So how are you liking the apartment?" my uncle asked Jake, who sat across from me. "Brittany mentioned you two moved into the building that belonged to her grandparents." Jake, who had always struck me as somewhat oblivious to family dynamics, responded with unfiltered honesty. "It's great. Tom and Diana have been incredibly generous, letting us stay there rent-free. They even help with the utility bills." A hush fell over the table. My fork froze midway to my mouth as I processed his words. Not only were they living rent-free, but my parents were also subsidizing their utilities. Meanwhile, I had been paying premium rent for 3 years and covering all my own expenses. My uncle, sensing the sudden tension, looked confused. "I thought Elsa was living there before. Did you two decide to be roommates?" Before Jake could respond, my mother jumped in. Elsa very kindly offered to let Brittany and Jake have the apartment when she heard about the baby. She knew they needed the space more than she did. Such a generous sister. I stared at my mother in disbelief. This complete revision of what had happened, this portrayal of me as having voluntarily sacrificed my home out of sisterly love, was more than I could silently bear. "That's not what happened," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I didn't offer anything. I was told to leave with 30 days' notice." The table fell silent again. My father cleared his throat. "Elsa, this isn't the time or place for this discussion." "When is the time, Dad?" I asked, setting down my utensils. "Because for 3 months, no one has acknowledged what actually happened. I paid above market rent for that apartment for 3 years, supposedly to help with the mortgage. Now Brittany and Jake live there for free, and you're helping with their bills." My mother's face flushed. "Your situation was different. You could afford the rent. Brittany and Jake are starting a family. So because I worked hard and was financially responsible, I deserved to be treated worse." The words came out louder than I intended, fueled by months of suppressed hurt and anger. "You are being dramatic," my father said dismissively. "It's just an apartment." It wasn't just an apartment to me, it was my home. I invested time and money making it a home, believing I would be there for years to come. And with no warning, you took it away and gave it to Brittany, just like you've always given her everything at my expense. Brittany, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly burst into tears. "Why are you trying to ruin Thanksgiving? This is supposed to be a happy time." My grandmother reached over to pat Brittany's hand consolingly, while my mother shot me a look of pure displeasure. "Now look what you've done. Brittany shouldn't be upset in her condition." In that moment, looking around at my family, my father's stern disapproval, my mother's protective stance toward Brittany, my sister's tears that effectively shifted all attention to her needs, once again I realized nothing had changed and nothing would change. The pattern was too deeply established. "I'm sorry," I said. Though not for speaking the truth, I was sorry that this was my family. Sorry that equity and respect seemed impossible. Sorry that I had spent so many years accepting treatment I didn't deserve. I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten meal and stood. "I think it's best if I go." "Don't be ridiculous," my father said. "Sit down and finish your dinner. We can discuss this another time." But I was already moving toward the coat rack in the hallway. My mother followed me, her voice low to avoid being overheard by the others. "Elsa, you're embarrassing yourself and us. This behavior is childish and ungrateful." I turned to face her as I buttoned my coat. "Ungrateful for what, Mom? For being treated as less important than Brittany my entire life, for being kicked out of my home so she could have it for free. Tell me, what exactly should I be grateful for?" She had no answer, just a look of frustration that I wasn't playing my assigned role of compliant daughter. I left without saying goodbye to the others. the sound of resumed conversation already filtering from the dining room as I closed the front door behind me. Driving home to my new apartment, I made another decision. The monthly transfers I had been making to my parents account for the apartment, which I had continued out of habit, and a lingering sense of obligation would stop immediately. If Brittany could live there for free with utilities included, there was no justification for me to continue subsidizing the arrangement. I knew this decision would have consequences. My parents would be angry. There might be threats of legal action. But for the first time, I didn't care. The emotional toll of maintaining a relationship where I was consistently undervalued had become too high a price to pay. It was time to establish boundaries, even if that meant facing conflict I had always tried to avoid. That night, I blocked my family's numbers on my phone. I needed space to process my feelings without their attempts to make me feel guilty or unreasonable. I needed time to rebuild my life on my terms, without the constant reminder that in my family's eyes, my needs would always be secondary. It wasn't just about the apartment anymore. It was about recognizing my own worth when those who should have valued me most clearly didn't. In the weeks following the Thanksgiving confrontation, I focused on creating a new living space that reflected who I was becoming, not just who I had been. I painted the walls of my smaller apartment in colors that energized rather than soothed, bought new furniture that fit both the space and my evolving taste, and purged items that carried too many painful associations. Professionally, I threw myself into new projects at work, volunteering for assignments that required travel and staying late to perfect presentations. My colleagues noticed the change with my boss, commenting on my renewed drive and creativity. What they didn't know was that immersing myself in work provided a welcome distraction from the family situation I was still processing. About a month after Thanksgiving, I received an email from my father with the subject line, "Rent payment overdue." The message was brief and businesslike, noting that my December payment had not been received and requesting immediate transfer of funds to avoid any misunderstanding. I did not reply, nor did I respond to the follow-up email a week later that took a more threatening tone mentioning potential legal consequences of breaking our agreement. I knew that without a formal lease, their legal position was tenuous at best. More importantly, I had finally recognized the fundamental unfairness of the arrangement. Why should I continue to pay for an apartment I no longer occupied, especially when the current occupants lived there for free? The question answered itself. Curious about my legal standing, I scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney, bringing copies of all email correspondence with my parents about the apartment bank statements, showing my consistent rent payments and receipts for the improvements I had made to the property. The attorney reviewed the documents carefully before giving me her assessment. Without a formal lease, this falls into a grey area legally. The emails established that there was an agreement for you to rent the apartment and your consistent payments create a history that would be recognised by a court. However, since you've already vacated the property, the main issue would be whether you're obligated to continue payments. And am I asked. She shook her head. Based on what you've shown me, no. You were essentially asked to leave and you complied. There was no discussion of continuing payments after your departure. The fact that the new occupants aren't paying rent further weakens any claim your parents might make. She paused, studying me with a sympathetic expression. But I should warn you, legal battles with family members rarely end well emotionally, even when you win on the merits. Have you tried discussing this with them directly? I described the Thanksgiving confrontation and its aftermath, the years of unequal treatment, and my recent decision to cut contact temporarily for my own well-being. I see, she said. In that case, my advice is to document everything, but avoid engaging unless they actually file a legal claim, which I doubt they will. Family disputes often involve threats of legal action that never materialize. Her prediction proved accurate. After several unanswered emails, escalating in tone, my father sent a final message stating that he was deeply disappointed in my failure to honor commitments, but made no mention of taking legal steps. What I didn't expect was the campaign my parents launched through extended family members. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began contacting me with concerned messages saying they had heard I was going through a difficult time and was making choices that hurt the family. It became clear that my parents had shared their version of events, casting me as irrational and selfish. Rather than trying to correct each misperception individually, I composed a single email that I sent to key family members, briefly explaining that I had been asked to vacate an apartment where I had paid above market rent for years, so that my sister could live there for free, and that I was taking time to reassess boundaries within my immediate family. I ended by requesting space and understanding during this process. The responses were mixed. Some relatives expressed genuine surprise at the full story, having heard only my parents' perspective. Others maintained that family should come first, regardless of the circumstances, implying that I should sacrifice for Brittany without complaint. A few simply acknowledged my message without taking sides, which felt like its own kind of support. Through this difficult period, I found unexpected allies. Colleagues became friends who invited me to holiday gatherings when they learned I wasn't seeing my family. A neighbour in my new building introduced me to a local book club, providing weekly social interaction that had nothing to do with my family drama. And perhaps most significantly, I joined a support group for adult children navigating complicated family relationships. In the support group, I heard stories that resonated deeply with my own experiences. People shared accounts of persistent favoritism, unclear boundaries, emotional manipulation, and the challenge of establishing healthy relationships with parents who struggled to see their adult children as autonomous individuals with valid needs. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my experience or guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. The group helped me recognize patterns in my family's behavior that I had normalized and accepted throughout my life. With their support, I began to develop strategies for maintaining connections while protecting myself from further exploitation. As months passed, I established a new routine and gradually rebuilt my savings, which had been depleted by the unexpected move. I remained firm in my decision not to resume rent payments for the apartment, despite occasional messages from my mother hinting at financial strain. "Your father is worried about meeting the mortgage payment this month," she would write without directly asking for money. I recognized these as attempts to reactivate my sense of responsibility and guilt, and I did not engage. What I didn't know during these months of limited contact was that my decision to stop payments was having significant consequences for my parents and, by extension, for Brittany and Jake. The rent I had been paying, which I had been told was necessary for the mortgage, truly was essential to my parents' financial planning. Without it, they were struggling to cover all their expenses, a situation made worse by their decision to subsidize Brittany and Jake's living costs. This reality would become clear 6 months after I moved out, when the carefully constructed family dynamic finally began to crack under financial pressure. The call came on a rainy Sunday afternoon in April, exactly 6 months after I had moved out of the apartment. I was curled up on my new sofa reading a novel and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of my smaller but personally meaningful space when my phone lit up with my father's name. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. We hadn't spoken directly since Thanksgiving, with all communication happening through terse emails or messages relayed by other family members. After a moment's deliberation, I answered, curious about what would prompt a direct call after months of silence. "Elsa?" My father's voice sounded different, lacking the authoritative tone I was accustomed to hearing. "Thank you for picking up. I wasn't sure you would. What can I do for you, Dad?" I kept my voice neutral, protective walls firmly in place. He cleared his throat. "I'm calling about a financial matter. The mortgage on the apartment building, it's become a significant issue." I waited, saying nothing, forcing him to continue without prompting. "The truth is," he said after an uncomfortable silence, "we've been using your rent payments to cover the mortgage all these years. Without that income, we're falling behind. The bank has sent several notices." "I see," I said, though this confirmation of what I had suspected brought no satisfaction. "That's unfortunate. Elsa, we need your help," he said, the words seemingly difficult for him to articulate. "If we could work out an arrangement, perhaps resume the previous payment schedule, we might be able to avoid more serious consequences." "Let me understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You want me to resume paying rent for an apartment I no longer live in while Brittany and Jake continue to live there for free?" "It's not that simple," he protested. "They're expecting a baby, they need support. And I don't deserve support. I didn't deserve to keep the home I had created and paid for." The questions were rhetorical, my point already made. My father sighed. "I know things didn't happen in the best way, but we're family, and families help each other through difficult times." "Yes, they do," I agreed. "But that help should go both ways. For years, I've been the one giving with little consideration for what I needed. That pattern stops now." After another silence, he said, "Will you at least think about it? The situation is becoming serious." I'll think about it, I promised without committing to any specific action. We ended the call shortly after, with nothing resolved but a door perhaps slightly opened. That evening, my mother called. Her approach was different, appealing to emotion rather than financial necessity. "Elsa, sweetie," she began as if the last 6 months of estrangement hadn't occurred. "Your father told me you two spoke today." "We did. I know things have been strained between us, and I'm sorry for that, but we miss you and we need your help right now. If you truly love your family, you'll find a way to support us through this difficult time." The manipulation was so transparent that in the past I might have immediately capitulated, eager to prove my love and loyalty. Now I recognize the tactic for what it was. Mom love isn't proven by financial sacrifice. It's demonstrated through respect, consideration, and treating each other fairly. I haven't seen much of that from you and Dad, especially regarding the apartment situation. "That's not fair," she protested. "We've always supported you." "Have you?" I asked quietly. Because from my perspective, I've spent my adult life trying to earn approval that came automatically to Brittany, paying inflated rent to help with expenses while she lives rent-free, and being labelled selfish when I expressed legitimate hurt over unequal treatment. My mother was silent for a moment, then changed tactics. "Brittany is struggling too, you know. The pregnancy has been difficult, and she's worried about the financial situation. Your actions are affecting her and the baby." "My actions, Mum? I didn't create this situation. I was perfectly willing to continue our original arrangement, paying rent and living in the apartment. You and Dad made the decision to prioritise Brittany over me, as you've always done. The consequences of that decision aren't my responsibility." We went back and forth for several more minutes, with my mother alternating between guilt trips and vague accusations. I remained calm but firm, refusing to accept blame or commit to resuming payments. Like the call with my father, the conversation ended without resolution. The next day, I received a barrage of text messages from Brittany. Unlike our parents' somewhat measured approaches, hers was raw and angry. "Thanks a lot for abandoning the family when we need you. Mum and Dad might lose the apartment building because of your selfishness. How am I supposed to raise a baby with this stress? I thought you cared about being an aunt." But I guess that was a lie too. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to process my reaction. My first instinct was defensive anger, but as I reflected on her messages, I felt a surprising sense of calm. Brittany's perspective was so skewed by years of preferential treatment that she genuinely couldn't see the injustice of the situation. In her worldview, my refusal to subsidise her rent-free living was an attack, not a reasonable boundary. Before I could decide whether to respond, another unexpected communication arrived. An email from Jake sent to my work address, not the personal one I had used for family correspondence. "Elsa, I hope this reaches you. I don't know if you're reading messages from family members right now, but I wanted to reach out separately. First, I want to apologise for my role in the apartment situation. When your parents offered us the place, they presented it as something you had agreed to, even suggested. I didn't realise until Thanksgiving that you had been blindsided and forced out. Things have been tense here since the financial issues started. Brittany and your parents have been arguing constantly. Yesterday, she said some things to them that I think you should know about, but she would be furious if she knew I was contacting you. Would you be willing to meet for coffee this week? I could provide more context then." This unexpected outreach from Jake, who had always seemed like a passive participant in the family drama, intrigued me. After considering the potential complications, I replied with a time and place for coffee, choosing a cafe in a neighbourhood where I was unlikely to encounter other family members. Jake arrived at our meeting looking tired and stressed, with shadows under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. After awkward greetings and ordering our drinks, he got straight to the point. "Brittany has been incredibly stressed about the financial situation with the apartment. Your parents have made it clear that without your rent payments, they're struggling to make the mortgage. There have been discussions about potentially selling the building, which would mean we would need to find a new place." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Last week, things came to a head. Your parents came over unannounced, wanting to discuss options. The conversation quickly turned into an argument with your mum, suggesting that Brittany and I should start paying rent if you wouldn't. Brittany exploded, saying they had promised us free housing, that they had always helped her, and couldn't stop now." Jake looked down at his coffee, seemingly uncomfortable with what he needed to say next. "In the heat of the argument, Brittany said some things I think you should know. She admitted that she and your parents had discussed the apartment situation long before they approached you. Apparently, when we first told them about the pregnancy, your father suggested the apartment as a solution, even though you were living there. Brittany was hesitant at first, knowing it was your home, but your parents convinced her that you would be fine, that you hoed the family, after all they had done for you. My stomach tightened at this confirmation that the decision had been made weeks before I was informed that my eviction had been planned, while I was congratulating my sister on her pregnancy. There's more, Jake continued. Brittany revealed that she knew about the above-market rent you were paying all along. Your parents apparently used to joke about how you never questioned the amount, how you were always so eager to please. She admitted feeling guilty about it sometimes, but said your parents assured her it was fair because you had a better job and could afford it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. After that argument, Brittany wrote you a letter. She was emotional and regretful, I think, genuinely seeing the situation clearly for the first time. She talked about sending it, but then decided against it, afraid of how you might react. I found it in her desk drawer yesterday and made a copy. I think you should read it. I took the envelope with trembling hands, uncertain whether I wanted to know its contents. After a moment's hesitation, I opened it and began to read. The letter was handwritten on notebook paper, Brittany's familiar looping script covering several pages. It began with an apology not just for the apartment situation, but for years of accepting preferential treatment at my expense. She wrote about growing up aware of the different standards our parents held us to, how she had benefited from their leniency while I faced higher expectations. I knew it wasn't fair, she wrote, but it was easier to accept the advantages than to question why they treated us so differently. When they offered us your apartment, I should have refused. I knew how much it meant to you, how hard you had worked to make it a home. But I was selfish and thought only about what would be convenient for Jake and me. The letter continued, revealing that our parents had used both of us in different ways, playing on my desire for approval and her expectation of assistance, manipulating us to serve their own purposes. They've always used us against each other, Brittany wrote. When you achieve something, they diminish it to make me feel better about my own struggles. When I need help, they present it as your responsibility to provide it, because family helps family. I'm starting to see how toxic this dynamic is, especially now that I'm about to become a parent myself. I don't want to raise my child in this environment of favoritism and manipulation. The final paragraphs express genuine remorse and a desire to repair our relationship, albeit with the recognition that trust would take time to rebuild. I don't expect forgiveness, she concluded. But I want you to know that I see now what I couldn't or wouldn't see before. You deserve better from all of us, especially me. I folded the letter carefully, processing its implications. Jake watched me silently, giving me space to absorb what I had read. Why are you showing me this? I finally asked. Because I care about Brittany, and I can see that this family situation is hurting her even if she doesn't always admit it. And because what was done to you wasn't right. I should have spoken up sooner. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. Does she know you're here? No, he admitted. She would be angry if she knew, but I think secrets and unspoken truths have done enough damage in your family. After our meeting, I returned to my apartment with the letter and much to consider. My parents' financial predicament was real, as was Brittany's apparent remorse. The question was how to respond in a way that acknowledged these realities, while maintaining the boundaries I had worked hard to establish. That evening, I made my decision. I would not resume rent payments for an apartment I didn't occupy, but I would respond to the situation in a way that might finally break the destructive pattern that had defined our family relationships for too long. I scanned Brittany's letter and attached it to an email addressed to my parents with a brief message. This is what I'm sending instead of money. Perhaps it's time we all acknowledge the truth and work toward genuine change. Then I waited, knowing that the easy patterns of the past were no longer an option for any of us. The response to my email was predictably not immediate. I imagined my parents reading Brittany's letter perhaps multiple times, conferring with each other about how to react, possibly confronting my sister about its contents. Whatever process they went through took several days, during which I continued my newly established routine, focusing on work friends and the small pleasures of my independent life. When my phone finally displayed my mother's name nearly a week later, I answered with the calm certainty of someone who had found solid ground after a long period of uncertainty. Elsa? My mother's voice was subdued, lacking both the authoritative tone and the manipulative sweetness she had alternated between in our previous conversation. Your father and I have read the letter. We've had some difficult discussions with each other and with Brittany. I'm listening, I said, neither encouraging nor discouraging her to continue. We owe you an apology. She said the words coming with apparent difficulty. Several apologies, actually. What we did with the apartment was wrong. The way we've treated you compared to Brittany has been unfair. We've taken advantage of your responsible nature and your desire to please us. I remained silent, waiting for more than just acknowledgement of what I already knew. I can't explain why we fell into these patterns, she continued. Perhaps because Brittany always seemed to need more help, more attention, while you seemed so capable on your own. But that's not an excuse. We should have valued your independence rather than exploiting it. Yes, you should have, I agreed simply. We'd like to meet with you to talk in person, she said. There's a lot to discuss about the apartment, about our relationship going forward, about how to make things right. I considered the request. Part of me was wary of returning to the familiar family dynamic where my needs were secondary, but another part recognized this as a potential turning point. I'm willing to meet, but not at your house or at the apartment. Neutral territory would be better. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant the following weekend. I approached the meeting with cautious optimism, but firm boundaries, prepared to leave if the conversation devolved into the old patterns of guilt and manipulation. My parents were already seated when I arrived, both looking more subdued than I had seen them in years. My father, usually imposing in his confidence, seemed smaller somehow, while my mother's normally perfect appearance showed signs of stress and sleepless nights. Thank you for coming, my father said as I sat across from them. I know you had every reason to refuse. I nodded, waiting for them to continue. After reading Brittany's letter and reflecting on our behaviour, we've come to some difficult realisations, he said. We've treated you unfairly, not just with the apartment, but throughout your life. We've held you to higher standards while making excuses for your sister. We've expected you to be the responsible one, the giver, without acknowledging how much we were taking. We took advantage of your good nature, my mother added. When you never complained about the rent being above market value, we told ourselves it was because you were happy to help the family. When you improved the apartment at your own expense, we saw it as adding value to our property rather than as your investment in your home. My father looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. I'm deeply ashamed of how we handled the situation when Brittany got pregnant. We should have discussed options with both of you, looked for a solution that didn't involve displacing you from your home. Instead, we made decisions that benefited her at your expense, as we've done too many times before. And when you rightfully objected, my mother continued, we labelled you as selfish, rather than acknowledging the selfishness of our own actions. Their words were validating, but I needed more than just acknowledgement. What happens now? I asked. Where do we go from here? My father sighed heavily. Financially, we're in a difficult position. Without your rent payments, we've been struggling with the mortgage. We've considered selling the building, but the market isn't favourable right now. I'm not resuming payments for an apartment I don't live in, I stated firmly. We wouldn't ask that of you, my mother assured me. That wouldn't be fair. What we would like, my father said, is to discuss a new arrangement, one that recognises your partial ownership interest in the property as a beneficiary of your grandparents' estate. This was news to me. What ownership interest? You always presented the apartment as entirely yours. My father had the grace to look embarrassed. Your grandparents' will specified that the property would pass to me, but with the understanding that you and Brittany would each inherit a percentage upon my death. We should have been more transparent about that. We spent the next hour discussing the financial and legal aspects of the property with my parents, revealing details that had been withheld from me for years. The mortgage was indeed real, but smaller than they had implied. The rent I had been paying exceeded what was needed for the mortgage payment, with the excess going into their personal expenses. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a potential path forward. I would not return to the apartment, nor would I resume payments for a place I didn't occupy. Instead, Brittany and Jake would begin paying a fair market rent, contributing to the mortgage as I had done. My parents would need to adjust their budget to account for the changes, possibly downsizing their own living arrangements. Most importantly, we began the more difficult conversation about our family dynamics, the patterns of favoritism and manipulation that had damaged our relationships. There were no quick solutions, no immediate fixes for years of ingrained behaviour, but acknowledging the problem was a necessary first step. As we prepared to leave, my mother asked hesitantly, "Would you consider coming to the hospital when the baby arrives? Brittany is due in 3 weeks, and despite everything, I know she would want you there. I considered the request. I'll think about it. My relationship with Brittany needs its own healing process, separate from my relationship with you. 3 weeks later, I did find myself in the hospital waiting room, having received a text from Jake, announcing that Brittany had gone into labor. Despite the complicated feelings I still harbored, the impending arrival of my niece or nephew represented something new and untainted by past family dynamics. When Jake emerged from the delivery room with news of a healthy baby girl, I congratulated him sincerely. And when, after some time, he asked if I wanted to see Brittany and the baby, I agreed with only slight hesitation. My sister looked exhausted but radiant as she cradled her newborn daughter. Our eyes met as I entered the room, and in that moment, without words, something shifted between us. The letter she had written had opened a door to honesty that had been closed for too long. "Her name is Lily," Brittany said softly. "Would you like to hold her?" As I carefully took my niece in my arms, feeling her tiny weight and marveling at her perfect features, I recognized that this child represented a new chapter, not just for Brittany and Jake, but potentially for our entire family. Here was an opportunity to break the cycles of favoritism and inequity to create a healthier dynamic for the next generation. In the weeks that followed, Brittany and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. Without our parents as intermediaries or instigators, we found ways to communicate more directly and honestly than we had in years. She apologized in person for her role in the apartment situation and for the time she had knowingly benefited from our parents' favoritism without questioning its impact on me. I met with my parents as well, not at family gatherings where old patterns could easily reassert themselves, but in structured settings where we could address specific issues. Sometimes these conversations were painful with defensiveness and old hurts surfacing unexpectedly. But gradually, incrementally, we began to establish new patterns of interaction based on mutual respect rather than established roles. The apartment situation resolved itself in an unexpected way. 2 months after Lily's birth, Brittany and Jake decided the space wasn't ideal for a growing family. They found a house with a yard in a family-friendly neighborhood and gave notice that they would be moving out. Rather than seeking a new tenant, my parents decided to sell the building, using the proceeds to pay off the mortgage and invest the remainder for retirement. I did not ask to return to the apartment, having created a new home that represented my independence and self-respect. My current place, though smaller, had become a symbol of my journey toward healthier boundaries and relationships. The healing process with my family is ongoing, with progress and setbacks along the way. There are still moments when old patterns emerge, when my parents unconsciously favor Brittany, or when I feel the familiar pressure to sacrifice my needs for family harmony. The difference now is that we recognize these patterns and can address them openly, rather than allowing resentment to build in silence. Perhaps the most profound change has come in how I view myself and my place within the family. For years, I had accepted the role of responsible daughter, the one who gives without complaint, the one whose needs are secondary. Breaking free from that role has allowed me to discover aspects of myself that were suppressed by the weight of others' expectations. I have learned that setting boundaries is not selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. I have discovered that standing up for myself doesn't mean losing my family, but rather creating the possibility for more authentic connections. And most importantly, I have realized that my worth is not determined by how much I sacrifice for others, but by my own internal sense of value and dignity. The journey from being the daughter who gave up her home without protest to the woman who demanded respect and fair treatment was not easy or straightforward. There were moments of doubt, periods of loneliness, and the pain that comes with disrupting long-standing family systems. But on the other side of that difficult passage, I found something invaluable: the knowledge that true family love doesn't require one person to consistently diminish themselves for others to thrive. Sometimes the bravest and most loving thing we can do for our families is to stop enabling unhealthy dynamics, even when that means facing conflict and discomfort. Sometimes the path to genuine connection requires first stepping back to establish who we are as individuals. And sometimes the letter we need to send is not one containing money, but truth. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took advantage of your generosity? Comment below and share your experience or advice for others facing similar situations. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength through challenging family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's often the first step toward healthier relationships for everyone involved.